Okay. With the mic, it's a bit difficult with the book. The book and the mic together. This has been a wonderful experience, putting this show up. I visited, Willie, when did I come here first to this?
January.
January. And just pretty much was here for 2 days, and we pretty much hung the show in my notebook, and it was really a pleasure, just so easy, and the team has been fantastic. And this is, I think, the only opportunity for me to really publicly thank people that were involved. So Willie, yourself, of course, long conversations when I was in Paris or wherever about little details and so forth, and Carmen, and Carlos, and Rodolfo is the team, Daniel and Jorge, and they were fantastic. Really, one of the best teams that I've dealt with anywhere. So that was really wonderful. Montserrat, who did the beautiful new banners made for this space. I think there are several works that were made for this space, particular. Giacomo and Juan Martin, who did a lot of sound stuff, and here I am. But I rarely do this, but I really feel that it's warranted in this instance because it's been a tremendous pleasure to do this show. Now, what time is it now? So I lost a half hour. My lectures are usually, they take anywhere from between, say, I've done really fast ones in 20 minutes and I've done long ones in, 72 hours. Those are the long lectures. And so this will be, I don't know, we'll see. Can it go a little past 8?
Yeah.
Okay, please. Okay, and my mother and my brother and my wife are here. My mother is this the first time you've been back to Mexico, and how long?
Yes.
A big deal. It's a big deal. And how long? How many years? 70 years? 60 years? 60 years? Okay. We're doing a book for this show, and it's been and it's really what the book is it's a catalog. There's a whole room full of notebooks of mine that go back to really 69. And one of them I've taken quotes out of. And what I want to start my lecture today, is the first time I've done this, is just to read some of these quotes that I found. And so these are just a couple of pages of statements before I do the kind of trance-like lecture. What I see defines what I don't see as being real. Trying to prove that stick figures live lives. Entering the picture, considering it real. A drawing of fire, is it hot? A drawing of water, is it wet? Yes, it's wet. Depicting snow, ice, rain, wind, storms, lightning, energy, sound, electricity, fire, stars, etc. My name is Matt Mulliken. I live at 370 Mesa Road, Santa Monica, California. My height is 6'2". I weigh 185 pounds. I was born on September 18th, 1951. I am currently 21 years old and single. Animated films. 30-second film of a character being shot and dying. 30-second movie of a stick figure being shot and dying. Animated film of 5 fictitious deaths in time, 10 seconds each. Audio tape of action representing a fictional situation. A walk between two fictitious places in sound on audio tape. 3 desks, sound effects, 20 seconds each. A pile of sand weighing about 800 pounds, 15 feet from the far left-hand corner of my studio. It stands about 3 feet high and 4 feet wide at the base. Its color is brown, it smells like the beach, it feels a little wet and grainy. It tastes salty, and from the other end of the studio, the light hits it broadside, so it looks lighter than it actually is. Colors under green vinyl, colors under green light, reflected black, projected black. Bullets were ricocheting off the marble walls. Several people in the lobby were hit by these bullets. One man hit in the throat gasped, my God, my God." His blood spurted all over the lobby. Performance of projecting into a picture and walking around in it. The personality of a symbol, the personality of an object, the personality of a picture, the personality of an action. Performance with a dead man, pinching his arm, shouting in his ear, putting my hand in his mouth, slapping his face. An open door between 2 lightless rooms. Bleeding green blood, bleeding red blood, bleeding blue blood, bleeding yellow blood, bleeding orange blood. Looking into a doll's eyes, fainting at the sight of his own blood, scared to enter a dark room. The altitude affected his hearing. The shoes felt tight on his feet. His cold inhibited his sense of smell. Catching his breath, feeling hungry after skipping lunch, tasting that there was too much salt in the salad, remembered the time he heard himself skiing. Music describing falling, music describing putting a pin in my finger, music describing how I feel riding a bike. So those are like text pieces. And now you'll see that I'm not going to be looking at you quite so clearly, and I'll start acting a little bit funny. These lectures I've been doing since the mid-70s, and they've evolved as an artwork on their own. They're in 3 parts. The first part's with the blackboard or green board. The second part is, and so what you see is I'm going to be talking about how things were born. Now when I do this, I do it with my eyes closed because a level of concentration is needed to do it, and you're very distracting. So I need to do that, and I will fidget and act odd, and that's just the body in response to the information that I'm trying to articulate, which is an interesting problem of what's the connection between my body and the information that I'm trying to describe. And the second part is, the second part is slides. And slides are just a bunch of still images of works that I've done over the past 40 years. And they are kind of a false memory. I can see them and get ideas. It's very simple. They kind of help me along. And then the third part is video. And the video is when I am actually on the side looking at myself on the screen, and I'm talking about it. The video I'm showing tonight is one of me in a trance state having breakfast in an office in Cologne, Germany. And then it's finished. So that's the lecture. And these lectures have really just, they've evolved, and it's kind of a demonstration of how I relate to the ideas that I articulate. I grew up in California, as I said earlier, although I'm no longer 21. That was written when I was. That's the age I was when you see a lot of the work up that's in the first room. Both my parents, my father's now dead. My father's name was Lee Mulliken. My mother, Rajita. We lived in Santa Monica, California. I went to California Institute of the Arts, I studied with John Baldessari and studied with fellow students, James Welling, David Sally, Jack Goldstein, Troy Brontuck, Eric Fischel, Ross Bleckner. There's a variety of people that were at that school at that time, California Institute of the Arts, in '71. Moved to New York and have been there. Now I'm living in Berlin, Germany, and in New York City. Now, the first work I want to talk about is All I See Are Light Patterns. And what I did was I was exploring, and in Los Angeles this is not unusual, the nature of light. There's so many artists that deal with this. Robert Irwin, Larry Bell, I mean just countless, Maria Norman. But I was really looking at it in a slightly different way while I was much younger and I was a student. I was interested in light patterns that my eye sees, the light that my eye sees. And when I'm looking at you, and what I see is light. I do not see you, I see the light reflecting off of you. That's what my eye sees. And so the light becomes you. And with that becoming is distance. So if I'm saying all I see are light patterns, then you are no different if I'm looking this direction than if I'm looking this direction. There's no difference between life and death. There's no difference between important and unimportant. There's no difference in all the contexts that I am ingrained with. It's a way of stepping out of how I project meaning into the world. So what I did is I did pieces like, I did a performance where I turned out the lights in an auditorium like this. I pulled out a stack of color aid cards. I have some in the show, and I put them all over the floor in the dark, and then gathered them all up and put them in a bag, and then turned the lights back on again. And what you could see, what you couldn't see was the color in the dark room. And that's what I was interested in, is the fact that how is the color in the dark room? How does it exist in the dark room? It's there, but it's not there. Because we always assume that color is a constant thing. But if I take this orange chalk and I start moving over here, and it gets brighter and brighter, and I move it down here, and I move it up here, what happens is that the color's the same in relationship to the light that's lighting it up, but from millisecond to millisecond, it's a different color to us. But the algorithm is constant, but the actual experience is very different. And yet, I believe in the algorithm that I don't experience. So, and I was doing pieces like, as I said, projected black, reflected black, which is just a piece of black plexiglass. I had remembered sitting on the hood of my car waiting for a friend of mine to come towards me, and I was watching her walk towards me, this long driveway. And as I looked at her, I was realizing that when I was seeing her, I wasn't seeing her, but the light reflecting off of her. And in that realization, I became blind. I'm not, what am I looking at? And that's the way this kind of, this time in my work was about. Then, I went on a trip in Easter, around Easter time of 1973. And I had an idea. And I was doing films and videos and photographs, all dealing with light. I made sculptures, it was all about this. But then I had this other idea. That's a swoopy board. And what the idea was a detail of a car's tire. And it was a drawing, a line drawing of a car's tire that never existed. It was a fictional car and a fictional tire. And the detail pointed to stuff that was outside the frame. And so I could ask, who's driving the car? Where is the car going? How fast is the car going there? Is there anybody in the back seat? Is it leather or is it vinyl or is it cloth, the interior? Does it have 400 horsepower or does it have 300 horsepower? I could go on forever to go into what was happening outside or inside the frame that I can't see. But when I had this idea of the detail of that car's tire, it was like a major light bulb. Because I was involved with light and light patterns. And what this did, I didn't even know how it connected to that other body of work. But intuitively, it was really the same thing. So what I did, within a week of that time, I thought to have a studio that was in a fictional studio, and it had a clock and a calendar and a plant that was growing and a person, a stick figure. And Glenn, and I named him Glenn. And Glenn, the stick figure, lived in this imaginary, fictitious, whatever kind of place, but he was in there. And one of the things that he did first was he took a pin and he pricked his finger. And I was interested in the pain that Glenn felt. He did all kinds of other things. He shouted and he jumped and he had lunch, he ran out errands, he put some stuff in the corner, he drew on the walls, he posted pictures on the walls, he did all kinds of stuff inside that space. But the thing that I was really interested in, if he pinches his arm, where is the pain? I wanted to know where that pain that I felt, he felt, was when he did this. And so immediately after doing this, within 3 or 4 weeks, I drew another person. And that was a dead stick figure. So I made Glenn, and the Glenn was a living stick figure, and then I put a dead person into that studio of his, and I had no studio at the time. I was in John Baldessari's class called Post-Studio Art. So I had no studio. I was undergrad anyway, and so my notebook was my studio. So this truly was my studio for working. And so I had a living stick figure and a dead stick figure. I wanted to know the difference. Okay, one's alive, one's dead. That's like light patterns. Okay, if I look at all of you and there's a dead person in the audience and I'm just looking at light patterns, I can't tell the difference. There's no difference between something that's being alive and something that's not. And so the dead man became more and more important. So that fall, I went to New York, and what I was doing, I was interested in the pictured reality. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was going into the pictures. I did a performance where someone put a drawing in front of my face and sat down. I sat down and I looked inside the drawing and I projected my mind's eye into it and walked into the drawing and made a left-hand turn off the picture plane and described myself as being 14 years old. The time was around, it was middle of the 17th century, and I was walking towards a construction site where my father was working, and I walked to, they were unearthing an arch, and I walked underneath the arch, I walked around the arch, and then I walked up a hill, and I looked down at the arch, and I could see that there were big puddles because it had rained that night before, so the ground was wet. And as I looked down at the puddles, and I described what I saw in that picture, the person that was holding the drawing lit it on fire. Very dramatic. It went up, and I could feel the flames, the heat on my face. And as I did that, you would thought it was like, I thought like the Twilight Zone or something. I'd be stuck in that drawing forever, and I couldn't get out because I took away the bridge. But that didn't happen. I as I shuffled my way down the hill, and as I shuffled down the hill, I looked at my feet and I noticed that I had barely any shoes on. I had these sandals that were minimal, and I had socks on, oddly, as I shuffled down, and then I ran home. I ran home, and that was the end of the performance. But I wanted to validate the picture, to go into the picture. I wanted to prove that stick figures live lives. Now, if I say all I see are light patterns, where is life in those patterns? Where does it exist? And so the patterns create a picture. And the picture is where I'm living. And thus, you know, it gets to the point there is a jump between life in the pattern and life in the drawing. So when Magritte says this is not a pipe, I say yes it is. You just do the opposite. Because I was interested in the fact of treating that illusion as a real place. I wanted to get into the cartoon. So what I did is I would cut up comic books, and there would be details that would normally be uninteresting. So when Superman is flying through the air, I'm not so interested in Superman, I'm interested in the air he's flying through. I'm interested in the sun that you never see, but is lighting up the entire area. I'm interested in the quality of the humidity in that drawing, or the sense, the smell of a room where Lois Lane and Superman are talking. The essence of that physicality. I wanted to get into the physicality of the implied meaning of a picture. Now, it was a crazy thing to do. But at the time, that's all I had. In 1971, conceptual artists were gods. Lawrence Weiner and minimalist artists were gods. So you had Lawrence Weiner, you had Carl Andre, Donald Judd, Hannah Darboven, Eva Hess, you had Saul LeWitt, you had, and then when Lawrence Weiner kind of said, well, the statement is all you need, and basically the reductivist train had ended with a big red bow tie on it, and they did it, and it was finished. And my generation comes along, and what do? What's left? It's all done. You put the big bow on the package, and reductivism was... So we, as a generation, were really just trying our hardest to get to the next thing. And this seemed said it was to go and not worry about the object, like Robert Ryman or with that whole bunch of people. They were all really concerned about the object. Richard Serra, and go on, so on and so on. It's just so many people. But I wanted to do the opposite. I say, not that I'm painting a realistic picture, but that I'm believing in it, that I'm going into it. The psyche enters pictures all the time. Like an apartment with $1 million view. It's just a view, it's just a picture, but it's $1 million picture that you're going to live in because everyone comes in, they say, oh, this is incredible. Not that you ever even touch it, you just see it on the top of that skyscraper. So pictures are really important, and that's what I was involved with. Now, the time I collected dead comic books, characters. I have a set of 8 in the exhibition, and I also was into my dream life. My dream life was very important. I was remembering details of my dreams. So if I was walking down the street and I smelled something in a dream, I noted it the next day because I was very aware of the sense of smell inside the dream. So in the dream, I was not so interested in the symbology, but in the physicality of that place that I was in. I was interested in the way my feet felt when I was walking down the road. I was interested in what I didn't see in a dream. I remember having an argument with my father, and he was standing here, and I was standing here, and it was a small little cabin, and it had a kind of a floor like this, although it moved a little bit more. And he was saying, this is a dream, this is not real. And I said, but it is real. I can feel the floor move. And he says, yes, it's a flooring move, but you're just dreaming. This isn't a real place. And I said, it's real, it's real, it's real. Having this argument with my father about this was funny, and I remember waking up and notating it in my book and thinking about it, this idea. But I wanted to get into the light source of dreams, all these elements, so I was really going into this pictured reality. Now, with the dead man, I started looking for a real cadaver to draw a real stick figure from. And so I called the morgue, the city morgue, and I asked them if I could come down and take pictures. And they hung up on me. They didn't even talk to me. They just hung up on me. I was a crank call. Eventually, I made it to Yale University. A friend of mine was going to medical school, and he had a cadaver. And he said, well, the face has been wrapped in gauze and formaldehyde for the first 5 weeks. And now we just unwrapped the face, and we're already starting to cut the back of the brain, the back of the skull. And in a few days it's going to be gone. So why don't you come up? And he invited me up to Yale, and I quickly got on a train. I went up there. I entered this room, and there were all the cadavers lying out there. And I walked to his with my camera, and the cadaver was on his stomach. And what I wanted to do to the cadaver is what Glenn did to himself. I wanted to pinch his arm. But he was face down because they'd been dealing with the back of the head. Well, we had to turn him over. And as we turned him over, his left arm fell off. It fell on the ground. So then I picked up the arm and I put it back. There it was. And then I pinched it. I pinched the arm the way Glenn pinches his arm, trying to understand the pain that the cadaver was feeling. And I put my hands in his mouth, I shouted in his ear, I lifted up his chest, I put my hands in his guts, I did a bunch of things with this cadaver. And I've had friends who were very upset with me doing this. This was a real kind of stupid thing. I mean, for them, this was sacrilegious. It crossed too many lines. But I didn't want to do big stuff. I didn't want to do bad stuff. I just wanted to deal with the person that the cadaver represents. That's what I wanted to do, was to go into that person. And so the next day, we were talking about the experience of this cadaver and being with it. And I realized just later in the day that we called him and it. He looked sad. He looked like he was a homeless man. He looked like he was a drunk. He looked like he sold his body for booze. But it smelled like formaldehyde. It was squishy. It was crusty. It was slippery. It was a kind of an odd, horrible physicality to this object. So the object and the subject were like, wham! The two were most pronounced. And I do think that the human body and being human is the most important point of this subject-object split that one thinks about when you're dealing with the arts. This is it. This is what it all comes down to. Am I an object or am I a human being? And it is a super important subject, and I just happened to come to it. Now later in the month, the face was gone. And the doctors did not want the students to be cutting up a body with a face. So they kept it wrapped up until then there was the face, and then they got rid of the face very, very quickly. Because they are objective. This is a model. Every cell in the cadaver's body had been transformed by formaldehyde. And in doing that, it it was changed. It was a model. You're not really dealing with a human being anymore. So I did that in, that was done in '74. So at the same time as I did this, I was drawing a lot of fictional things inside a kind of this halfway house of a studio. And one of the things that I was thinking about was deities, this idea of a fiction that was somehow more real than a character in a play or a movie. And that would be like a god, or an idea of something that I believe in and that I run my life by. And I was looking at my own life, trying to figure this out. And when I was a child, I had an idea. And my mother is from Venezuela, but I only went to church in Venezuela and then in Oklahoma, where my father grew up. I never went to church in LA. And so this was, in a sense, my little bit of spirituality. And what it was that before I was born, I chose my parents. And there was a conveyor belt, and it had all these names on it, and I was with a lot of other babies before our birth, and I chose to go down the Mulligan chute. I said, this is the place for me. And so then I went down the Mulligan chute and entered life. Okay, and so that's what I did. I went down the chute into my life as I am experiencing, or how I was experiencing it when I was 8 years old. Now, I wasn't really thinking about the other people or persons or whatever, I don't know what you call them, that they look like people, but I don't think we were people necessarily, but they really look like they belong in a cartoon, like Disney or Warner Brothers. And then I had this idea of fate. And Fate looked at a TV, and there was a big lever. And he sees me on this TV 24/7. And what Fate does is that he controls, and so in my birth date, 1951, and my death date, he pulls down this lever, and that basically creates all my issues in my life. So if a dog bites me, well, he did it. Or if I fall and hurt my knee, well, he did it again. So if ever I had a problem, it was fate who did this thing to me. So what happens next, since I'm working with this cadaver and this whole thing, I come up with this image of death. And then I say, at my death, and this is my death, right there, this line. At my death, fate meets death in a semicircular corridor, and they talk in numbers together. As they talk in numbers, they decide if I should go up to heaven or if I go down to hell. And that's hell down there. So it's a big why. Do I go up or I go down? So this answers the question of what happens after I die, what happens before I'm born, and why do things happen the way they do when I live my life? So what it did is that it answered these basic questions about the universe for me. It was a cosmology. And I made a lot of drawings of the details from this cosmology. In my artistic career, I must have drawn 500, 1,000 drawings, maybe more, when you count all the notebooks and redrawing it, and it's evolving, it's changing. And you'll see it in the show. So this is, and when I grew up in Santa Monica, my parents had a collection of many different kinds of objects. some from India, some from American Indian, from Central America, from Japan, from China, from Oceania, from New Guinea, from, you know, all over. And it was, our house was just filled with this stuff. This is where I grew up. And I was sitting, I come up with this idea about this cosmology. I was sitting down there and I looked at everything, and it wasn't art. Most of the stuff that I was looking at, it took, what was it? What was it there for? And most of it was medicine, I think. And most of it was medicine in relationship to this larger picture, a cosmology of sorts. And that's what was art as we saw it when we look at it. But it had to do with gods, and it had to do with afterlife, before birth, around, all this stuff. So I came up with my own kind of representation. And the reason, and you know, here I am, a young artist at CalArts, and I'm representing God in my work, and demons and angels, they come in later. But before birth and fate and death. And these are themes were the antithesis of Lawrence Weiner. The absolute opposite of all that conceptual stuff. And I was going to say, if I believe that the picture is real, well then death is real as well. And God is real, and all this stuff. And I'm just jumping into the subjective universe. And that's what I was doing. So this was happening at the same time as I was doing Glenn, as I was doing the comic books, and I was taking photographs of where I lived. I was taking photographs of my kitchen, I was taking photographs of my bathroom, I was taking photographs of my bedroom, where I, you know, the street outside. It started a long kind of listing of my life, trying to understand where I was, or just to have that relationship to where I was. Now, is this going to be the... So now I'm going to erase this, and we'll go to the next bit. I know I have to speed up. We're almost at timeout now. But I have to do a couple of more things. So here I have photographs, as I said. There's a photograph of a person, and I'm going to call him Glenn. And then I have, over here, I have a person on TV, and we'll call him Glenn. And then we have a person over here on stage, a character on stage, and we'll call him Glenn. So the Glenn on the, and this is the photo, and then it leads to a comic book, and there's a Glenn in the comic book. He has a name, everyone knows it, he's a famous comic book character. And then we go to an individual, just a drawing, without a comic book, without a story, kind of anonymous, but I can still call him Glenn. Then we go to a stick figure framed. So he's in his world. I'm not really involved with it, and I call him Glenn. And then we go to Glenn drawn directly onto the wall, and I call him Glenn. And then we have the bathroom symbol of the person. And then we have the man broken up. And so then we'll call him Glenn, we can call him Glenn. And then we go to a head and body, a very simple shape. The most minimal, I came up with the head and body, it seemed to be the most simple representation of a human being. And then I go to a square circle triangle, which is the side of the shape. So, and I call him Glenn, and I call him Glenn. The circle square triangle is named Glenn too. So I have this progression, and all my exhibitions in the 70s followed this progression. And I added things to it, and I did text, and I had a birth to death list, and And the top gallery here is this 70s room. Now, if I was to lay out all these different, from the photograph and the drawing, the comic, and I put them all on the ground, and I get a pin, a la voodoo, and I prick the photograph, and then I prick the comic, and then I prick the drawing, and I prick the stick figure in the thing, and I prick the stick figure here, and I prick the sign, and I prick the head and body, and I prick the man broken up in the face, and then the symbol. Who feels the most pain? I would ask that. And normally in the late 70s, I would lay these things and I would actually do it, and then the audience would say, generally the audience said around here. This is a bit too remote, and this is a bit too abstract. But there's a kind of a sweet spot here where we're projecting into the picture enough in order to feel that pain that they feel. Now also I can say, who feels the most pain when they prick their own finger? And I would say most likely it's going to be over here. When they prick their own finger, that's it. I have a film of me bleeding green blood, and I was showing it in a movie house, and a friend of mine had to leave the theater. She couldn't stand to watch it anymore. She was just going nuts. And so that would be over here. So this is, and so what's happening, that everything on this, from here all the way to here, is just paper. And yet, the paper of Glenn here is somehow real, and the paper of Glenn here is totally not real. Because we understand that paper to be different things. And so it's a splitting apart of the subject and the object. That's a very abstract head. And then you have the circle. So it's breaking apart. And one is aware of the projection into the sign, separate from the object. In a way, it's the cadaver's face, before they cut it and after they cut it. I remember standing on a street corner and looking at a woman, and she was in front of me, and she was, the way she was walking, you could tell that she was not alone. There was a person in front of her just by the way she was walking, and I could see it. So I followed her onto the bus, and as I did, I sat behind her, and within 3 blocks she starts talking to this imaginary friend that she was with. But it was her posture that gave this friend away, because when we follow somebody, we act differently than when we're by ourselves. We just do. Our body is different. And that is, in a sense, what I saw. And she's over here somewhere when she's dealing with that guy. People talk about the hypnosis and what's going on there. And that's really when you separate the object from the subject to the point of where the person who's experiencing it believes totally that they are experiencing this world independent of any interface. There's no photograph, there's no film, there's no sound, it's another thing. So then, in doing this, I'm sorry about this, takes time. I had all these charts, and I had a cosmology, and I could go into a living cosmology versus a dead cosmology. I was interested in the projecting into the drawings and so forth. And then I had this idea that when I have one of those signs, and it could be okay, let's say the sign of the person, and it's always been on paper. So I said, well, what if I make a poster? And I make a poster of it, and then I make a flag of it, and then I make a packaging design out of it. This was in '78. And so I went through a Graphis annual, and it had book cover design, packaging design, poster design, even letterhead, visual for TV, and it was a whole long list, a table of contents from the Graphis Annual. And I wanted to make all of those in relationship to my world. And then I saw in the yellow pages of the phone book, those were the days, and it was a flag shop, and it sold banners, flags, pennants, patches, buttons, trophies, uniforms. It had this whole long list. And I said, God, I can do that. And I did. And I came up, the first sign was like the BMW sign that I came up as a logo for my world. And it just was, it became, I had a kind of a bunch of signs in order to represent the world that I was representing. And so flags were starting to be made, posters, and I felt when my first exhibition at Mary Boone Gallery, it was like a trade show. I had a chart that was there, I had a bulletin board demonstrating different pictures, I had drawings going into different states of mind, I had posters representing different kinds of activities. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to now we're now into 1980, and we're just going to run through the slides super fast. Is there some people that can move this while I talk? Just to move it over there. Or I can just do it with them. Oh, I can do it. It's going to fall. Hold it. Just over there to the side. Oh. Uh-oh. Media does that. It breaks. Media breaks. Always breaks. How do I control the? I'm just going to. Okay, so let's just get the picture on the wall and turn down the lights. And I'll just say, when I want the new picture, we'll just say next. Okay, we have 15 minutes. What? Don't worry. Don't worry. Okay, so this is in my studio.